The Great Hall of the Galaxy Council stretched wider than any building ever made by human hands. 300 species had sent their representatives here, and they sat in rows that curved upward like a massive bowl. Lights hung from the ceiling like captured stars in the air, with the sound of translators working in 1,000 languages. At the center of this hall stood a single human man named Daniel Cooper. He wore the formal uniform of Earth's diplomatic service, and his face showed nothing of what he felt inside. High Arbiter of the species looked down at Daniel from his elevated seat. There were snake-like beings with scales that shifted based on their mood. Right now those scales were a dark purple, which meant contempt. He had just finished reading the council's decision, and a small smile played on his thin lips. The motion fails, announced to the assembly. Earth's request for full voting rights is denied. Humanity will remain a provisional member as it has been for the past 73 years. This matter is closed. A wave of agreement passed through the chamber. Representatives from dozens of species all made gestures of approval. The collective with their insect-like bodies clicked their approval. The Empire's ambassador showed his sharp teeth in what passed for a smile among his kind. They had all voted against humanity once again. Daniel stood perfectly still as the noise washed over him. 73 years. That was how long Earth had been part of this council. That was how long humans had followed their rules and paid their fees and sent their soldiers to fight in council wars. That was how long they had provided resources and scientists and workers while being told they were not ready for equality, not mature enough, not advanced enough, not worthy. He thought about his grandmother, who had been part of the first human delegation to reach council space. She had believed in the promise of galactic cooperation. She had died still believing that one day humanity would earn its place among the stars. She had been wrong. "I have a response," Daniel said. His voice was calm and it carried across the silent chamber. Every eye and sensor turned toward him. Waved one of his 4 hands in a gesture of permission. "Speak then, human. Tell us how grateful you are for our continued guidance." Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a small crystal chip. It glowed faintly blue in his palm. "By the authority granted to me by the United Earth Government, I am delivering this formal notice. Effective immediately, Earth withdraws from the Galaxy Council. All treaties between humanity and council species are terminated. All trade agreements are cancelled. All mutual pacts are void." For 3 long seconds nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The translators themselves seemed to freeze as if they could not believe what they had just processed. Then laughed. It was a harsh sound like metal scraping against stone. "This is a joke, surely. You cannot be serious, Ambassador Cooper. Earth exists because we allow it. Your trade routes pass through our space. Your technology comes from our markets. Your very survival depends on council protection." "We are completely serious," Daniel replied. He walked forward and placed the crystal chip on the central podium. "This contains the full legal documentation of our withdrawal. You will find everything in order." The ambassador stood up from his seat. His species were tall and broad with grey skin and 4 arms that ended in clawed hands. "You forget your place, human. Your kind came to us begging for scraps less than a century ago. Without the council you are nothing. You have nothing." Daniel turned to face him directly. "With respect, Ambassador, we have learned much in 73 years. We have learned how the council truly operates. We have learned what happens to species that grow too quickly or ask too many questions. We have learned that the only equality we will ever receive is the equality we take for ourselves." He began walking toward the exit. His footsteps echoed in the stunned silence. "If you leave this chamber," called out, "there will be consequences. The council does not forgive betrayal." Daniel stopped at the door and looked back one final time. "We are counting on it." Then he was gone. Far away in the cold darkness of space, Admiral Mills sat in her command chair aboard the dreadnought Resolute. She was a woman of 50 years with grey hair cut short and eyes that had seen too many battles. Around her, the bridge crew worked at their stations, and every one of them was waiting for the same signal. Commander Harrison stood beside her. He was younger than by 15 years, but his face carried the same weight of knowledge. They both knew what was coming. The communication screen flickered, and Daniel Cooper's face appeared. "It is done, Admiral. Protocol homecoming is authorized." "Understood, Ambassador," replied. "Godspeed." The screen went dark and turned to her crew. "Send the signal to all human vessels in council space, military ships and civilian transports and research stations and mining operations. Everyone moves now. We have been for this day for 30 years. Let us make sure it was not wasted." Across 12 different sectors of space, human ships began to move. Cargo haulers that had been loading goods suddenly powered up their engines and headed for deep space. Research stations that had been conducting experiments started packing equipment that the council had never known they possessed. Military vessels that had been stationed at Council bases quietly slipped away into the darkness. The Council had never bothered to watch humanity closely. Why would they? Humans were primitive newcomers who had barely figured out that light travel. They were workers and soldiers and servants. They were not a threat. That mistake was about to cost them everything they had built over 12,000 years. On Earth, President Maria Santos watched the reports come in from her office. She was a small woman with dark hair and darker eyes, but there was nothing small about the fire that burned inside her. 3 generations of her family had served humanity's interest on the galactic stage. 3 generations of smiling and bowing and accepting insults with grace. No more. How long until all our people are clear of Council space? She asked. Her chief of staff checked his tablet. 72 hours for full evacuation, Madam President. And the Council's response? Confusion mostly. They are still trying to understand what just happened. I do not think they believed we would actually do it. Maria smiled, but there was no warmth in it. They thought we were tame. They thought 73 years of humiliation had broken us. They never understood that we were not waiting for permission. She turned to look out the window at the city spread below her. We were waiting for the right moment. The stars hung in the night sky above Earth. They had always seemed so distant and so cold, but Maria knew the truth now. Those stars were not cold, they were afraid, they just did not know it yet. 3 months passed after Earth cut its ties with the Galaxy Council. During that time, the great powers of the galaxy watched and waited and planned. They could not believe that the humans had truly walked away from everything the Council offered. Surely it was a bluff. Surely they would come crawling back begging for forgiveness. But the weeks turned into months and humanity remained silent behind its borders. War Minister of the Empire grew tired of waiting. He was an old warrior who had conquered 12 worlds in his youth, and he did not understand patience. In his experience, problems were solved with force. The humans were a problem, therefore force would solve them. He gathered his fleet commanders in the war room of his flagship and spread a holographic map before them. The blue dots showed territory. The small green cluster in the corner showed human space. It looked so tiny, so fragile. The humans have made themselves vulnerable, said. His deep voice rumbled like thunder in the metal room. Without Council protection, they stand alone. We will teach them the price of arrogance. We will take their outer colonies and enslave their population. The galaxy will see what happens to those who forget their place. His commanders roared their approval. 400 warships assembled at the edge of space. It was the largest fleet they had gathered in 2 centuries. Each ship bristled with weapons that had crushed a dozen species before humanity had even discovered fire. Victory was certain. The target was a human colony called New Providence. It was a farming world with a population of 2 million. It had a small garrison and perhaps a dozen patrol ships. They expected to take it within hours. They were very wrong. The armada dropped out of the light travel at the edge of the New Providence system. Sensors immediately began scanning for threats. What they found made no sense. War Minister, the sensor officer reported with confusion in his voice. I am detecting strange energy readings throughout the system. They do not match any known technology. Waved his hand dismissively. Human tricks. They are trying to frighten us with light shows. All ships advanced to attack formation. The fleet moved forward. 400 vessels arranged themselves into the classic hammer pattern that had broken so many enemies before. Ahead of them, the small blue world of New Providence hung in space like a jewel waiting to be claimed. Then space itself began to tear apart. Rips appeared in the fabric of reality. They glowed with that had no names, and they opened like wounds across the darkness. From these wounds came ships, human ships, but they were not like anything they had ever seen. These vessels were sleek and angular where human ships had always been blocky and crude. They moved with impossible speed, changing direction in ways that should have torn them apart. And there were so many of them, hundreds of ships pouring out of tears in spacetime itself. Captain of the cruiser Devastator stared at his screens in disbelief. That is fold space technology. The Council has been trying to develop it for 6,000 years. How do the humans have it? No one could answer him. No one had time. The human ships opened fire, and the universe itself seemed to scream. They did not use plasma weapons or missiles or any technology they recognized. Instead, they fired beams of pure gravitational force. These beams bent space around ships and crushed them like insects under a boot. Shields meant nothing. Armor meant nothing. Ships that had survived 100 battles crumpled into balls of twisted metal in seconds. Commander Gray led the human from his vessel, the Defiant. He was a young man by military standards, only 35 years old, but he had trained his entire life for this moment. Every human in the fleet had trained for this moment. All wings focus fire on their command ships, ordered through the fleet communication channel. Do not let any of them escape. The galaxy cannot know what we can do, not yet. The battle was not really a battle, it was an execution. They tried to fight back, but their weapons could not lock onto ships that moved and their targeting systems could track. They tried to retreat, but the humans had already closed the fold space rifts behind them. They tried to surrender, but orders had been clear: no survivors. Within 6 hours, 400 warships had been reduced to floating debris. Not a single human vessel was lost. Not a single human life was spent. On the bridge of the Defiant watched the last enemy ship break apart. There was no joy in his eyes, only cold satisfaction. Send word to Earth. The first test is complete. Our technology works exactly as designed. Far away, they received no word from their mighty fleet. They sent signals that were never answered. They waited for victory reports that never came. Then slowly, terribly, the truth began to reach them through spy networks and intercepted communications. Their fleet was gone, not defeated, not damaged, gone, erased from existence as if it had never been. Did not survive the news. His heart gave out when he saw the footage that a hidden probe had captured. The sight of his invincible armada being swatted aside like gnats was more than his old body could bear. The Council received the same footage 3 days later. It was delivered anonymously, but everyone knew where it came from. The message was clear. Humanity was no longer prey. Humanity had claws now, and those claws were sharper than anyone had imagined possible. High Arbiter watched the recording 17 times. Each time he looked for some trick or deception. Each time he found nothing but the horrible truth. How, he whispered to his advisors, how did they hide this from us? We had spies in their government. We had agents in their military. We monitored their research facilities. How did they develop technology that surpasses our own without us knowing? No one could answer him, because the answer was too terrible to accept. The humans had fooled them. For 73 years the humans had smiled and bowed and played the part of grateful newcomers. And all that time they had been building in secret, planning in secret, for the day when they would no longer need to pretend. That day had come, and the galaxy would never be the same. On Earth, President Maria Santos addressed the United Assembly. Every representative from every nation watched as she spoke. Her voice was steady, but her words carried the weight of a species finally standing tall. For 73 years we let them believe we were weak because we needed to be weak. We needed time, time to learn, time to grow, time to build. She paused and looked directly into the cameras. That time is over. We will never bow again. We will never beg again. And anyone who threatens our people will learn exactly what humanity is capable of. They were the first to test us. Let them be the last. The assembly erupted in cheers that shook the building to its foundation. Humanity had found its voice at last, and that voice roared with the strength of 8 billion souls united in purpose. The Galaxy Council had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. In that time they had seen empires rise and fall. They had watched species climb from primitive caves to starships. They had guided the development of civilization itself, or so they claimed. The truth was much darker, and humanity had discovered that truth within the first decade of joining the Council. Dr. Lane was 72 years old now, but she remembered clearly the day everything changed. She had been a young researcher then working in the Council's Grand Archive on the station world of Prime. Her job was simple. She was supposed to translate ancient texts and historical records. It was boring work, but it gave her access to databases that few humans had ever seen. One night, while searching for a reference to early-than-light travel, she found a file that was supposed to be sealed. The encryption was old, and her curiosity was strong. She broke through the security without really thinking about what she might find. What she found changed her life. What she found changed humanity's future. The file contained records of a species called the. According to the documents, they had been a peaceful race of scientists and philosophers. 3,000 years ago, they had discovered something called zero-point energy. This technology could provide unlimited power from the fabric of space itself. It would have transformed the galaxy. It would have freed every species from dependence on traditional fuel sources. The Council had responded by sterilizing every was killed, their technology was destroyed, their name was erased from official histories, found the authorization order signed by the Council's inner circle. The reason given was simple: uncontrolled technological advancement threatens galactic stability. That was not the only file she found. There were hundreds more, thousands more. Species after species had been eliminated because they grew too quickly or thought too freely or asked too many questions. They had been destroyed because their philosophers began questioning the Council's right to rule. They had been enslaved because they developed weapons that could threaten Council fleets. The Een had been modified at the genetic level to reduce their intelligence because they were advancing than the elder species liked. The pattern was clear and terrible. The Council did not guide development, they controlled it. They decided which species would advance and which would remain primitive. They decided which technologies would be allowed and which would be suppressed. They played God with the galaxy and they murdered anyone who challenged their authority. Had everything she found onto a hidden drive. Then she returned to Earth and shared what she had learned with the highest levels of government. The decision that followed was unanimous. Humanity would never trust the Council again, but they could not fight the Council either. Not yet. They were too weak and too new and too vulnerable. So they began to plan. Every human scientist working in Council space became a spy. Every diplomat became an intelligence agent. Every merchant became a smuggler of secrets. They smiled and they bowed and they played their role perfectly. All the while they were learning, copying, stealing. The Council's technology was reverse-engineered in hidden labs deep beneath Earth's surface. Human scientists studied fold space theory in facilities that officially did not exist. Engineers built prototypes of weapons that the Council believed were impossible. All of it was hidden behind layers of false data and fake projects and deliberate failures that made humanity look exactly as primitive as the Council expected. 30 years of secret work, 30 years of pretending to be less than they were. 30 years of watching and waiting, and for the day when they would no longer need to hide. Now that day had come and sat in the Earth Security Council chamber surrounded by the leaders who would shape humanity's future. President Santos sat at the head of the table. Admiral Mills was there along with Secretary of Cross and a dozen others who held the fate of their species in their hands. The Council knows something is wrong, reported. Our sources indicate that they are gathering their full military strength. They mean to crush us before we can grow any stronger. How many ships? Admiral Mills asked. Approximately 12,000 combat vessels spread across 400 star systems. It would take them months to assemble a unified fleet. And our strength? Pulled up a display showing human space. 9,000 warships in defensive positions around Earth and our core colonies. Another 3,000 under construction. Our fold space technology gives us the ability to concentrate forces anywhere in minutes while they must travel for days or weeks. President Santos studied the numbers carefully. We could win a defensive war, but that is not enough. As long as the Council exists, they will be a threat. They will spend centuries trying to undermine us, sabotaging our alliances, turning other species against us. Then we do not fight a defensive war, said a voice from the end of the table. Everyone turned to look at Daniel Cooper. The ambassador had been quiet throughout the meeting, but now he leaned forward with intensity in his eyes. The Council's power rests on fear and ignorance. The other species obey because they believe resistance is impossible. They accept their place because they do not know any other way. He paused to let his words sink in. What if we showed them another way? What if we offered them the truth? Admiral Mills frowned. You want to share our technology with alien species? That could be dangerous. Not as dangerous as facing the Council alone. Think about it. There are hundreds of species out there who have suffered under Council rule. Species who have been held back and exploited and threatened just as we were. They are not our enemies, they are potential allies. President Santos slowly, you are suggesting we build our own coalition, an alternative to the Council. I am suggesting we give the galaxy something it has never had, a choice. The Council maintains power because the other species believe there is no other option. We can show them they are wrong. The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. What Daniel was proposing would change the entire structure of galactic civilization. It was bold and risky and possibly insane. It was also brilliant. Draft a proposal, Santos said finally. We will call it the Free Systems Alliance. Any species that wants to break free of Council control will be welcome. We will share our technology openly. We will protect those who join us. And we will show the universe that the Council's time is ending. 3 weeks later, the proposal was broadcast across every communication channel in the galaxy. It reached farmers on agricultural worlds and soldiers on military bases and scientists in research stations. It reached the oppressed and the forgotten and the desperate. And they listened to humanity's message of freedom, and for the first time in 12,000 years they began to hope. The Council's response to humanity's broadcast came than anyone expected. Within 1 week of the Free Systems Alliance announcement, a diplomatic vessel arrived at Earth's border carrying an offer that would have seemed impossible just months before. Full membership with complete voting rights, reparations for 73 years of exploitation, a formal apology to be broadcast on every inhabited world, a seat on the Council's inner circle, Everything humanity had asked for and been denied was suddenly being offered on a silver platter. President Santos read the terms in her office while her cabinet waited in tense silence. Outside the windows of the presidential residence, the sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across the buildings where 8 billion humans went about their daily lives. None of them knew that the future of their species was being decided in this room at this moment. "It is everything we wanted," Secretary of State William Turner said carefully. "Everything they refused to give us for 7 decades. "Because they are afraid," Santos replied without looking up from the documents. "Not because they believe we deserve it, not because they have changed, because they are terrified of what we might do next." Admiral Mills stood by the window with her arms crossed. She had spent 30 years for war with the Council. The idea of peace felt strange to her, almost wrong. "If we accept this offer, we return to their system. We play by their rules again. We sit in their chambers and vote on their motions and pretend that everything is forgiven." She shook her head slowly. "They will spend the next century trying to destroy us from within. They will turn other species against us. They will sabotage our technology. They will do everything they failed to do before." "And if we refuse?" Turner asked. "Then we remain alone, one species against an empire that has lasted 12,000 years. Secretary Cross pulled up a holographic display showing the current state of the galaxy. Blue dots represented Council territory stretching across thousands of star systems. Green dots showed human space, a small but growing cluster in the corner, and scattered throughout the map were tiny yellow dots. Each one represented a species that had responded positively to humanity's broadcast. "We are not alone," said. "Not anymore. 47 species have already contacted us about joining the Alliance. 47 species who are willing to risk everything for a chance at freedom. More messages arrive every hour." Santos finally looked up from the documents. Her dark eyes moved from face to face, studying the people she trusted most. "The Council is offering us safety, comfort, a return to the way things were, but the way things were meant accepting their control. It meant playing by rules designed to keep us weak." She stood and walked to the window where was standing. The last light of the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and red. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about the first days of human contact with alien life. She said that when the Council ships first appeared, everyone believed it was the beginning of a new era, an era of cooperation and shared progress, an era where humanity would take its place among the stars as equals." Santos paused and her voice grew harder. "That dream died within the first decade. The Council never wanted equals, they wanted servants, they wanted resources. They wanted soldiers to fight their wars and workers to fuel their economy, and they told us to be grateful for the privilege." She turned to face her cabinet. "I will not go back to that. I cannot go back to that. Not after everything we have sacrificed, not after everything we have learned." "Then what do we do?" Turner asked. "We reject their offer, we build the Alliance, and we show the galaxy that there is another way to live." The decision was announced the next day. Earth formally declined the Council's peace offer. Instead, humanity extended its own invitation to every species in the galaxy. "Join us, stand with us, be free." The Council's reaction was fury barely contained behind diplomatic language. High Arbiter addressed the Assembly with scales that had turned almost black with rage. "The humans have chosen war," he declared. "They have rejected peace and cooperation. They seek to tear apart the fabric of civilization that has held this galaxy together for millennia. We cannot allow this. We must not allow this." But even as he spoke, cracks were forming in the Council's united front. Representatives from dozens of species sat in uncomfortable silence. They had heard humanity's message. They had heard the promises of freedom and equality, and many of them were wondering if the humans might be right. The collective was the first to break. They were an ancient species, but they had long chafed under dominance. Their representatives stood and addressed the Assembly with words that sent shockwaves through the chamber. "The collective withdraws its support for military action against humanity. We believe dialogue is still possible. We believe the Alliance proposal deserves consideration." Scales flashed through three in rapid succession. "You would side with these primitives. You would betray 12,000 years of partnership." "We would consider all options," they replied calmly, as any wise species should. More cracks appeared in the following days. The ETH Federation announced they were opening informal talks with human representatives. The Remnant declared neutrality in any potential conflict. The collective sent a secret message expressing interest in Alliance membership. On Earth, the response to humanity's invitation exceeded all expectations. Within 1 month, 47 species had become 216. Ships carrying diplomats and refugees and hopeful colonists began arriving at human space in a steady stream. They came from every corner of the galaxy. They came because humanity had offered something the Council never had. Hope. President Santos met with the first wave of alien ambassadors in a ceremony broadcast across both Alliance and Council space. She stood on a stage surrounded by beings of every shape and size. Some had scales, some had feathers, some had bodies that human understanding, but all of them had come seeking the same thing. "You have traveled far to be here," Santos said, her voice carried across the silent crowd. "You have left behind everything you knew, you have risked everything you had, and you did it because you believed in a simple idea. The idea that every species deserves the right to determine its own future. The idea that strength comes from cooperation, not domination. The idea that the universe belongs to all of us." She paused and looked out at the assembly of alien faces. "I cannot promise you that the path ahead will be easy. The Council will fight us, they will try to destroy what we are building, but I can promise you this. Humanity will stand beside you, we will share our knowledge, we will defend your worlds, and we will never ask you to bow." The cheering that followed shook the ground beneath their feet. Humans and aliens stood together, united by something stronger than fear, united by the belief that tomorrow could be better than yesterday, united by hope. And across the galaxy, the Council watched in growing horror as their empire began to crumble, not through war, not through conquest, but through the simple, terrible power of an idea whose time had finally come. 5 years had passed since Earth cut ties with the Galaxy Council. In that time, the universe had transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Free Systems Alliance had grown from a desperate hope into a reality that stretched across hundreds of star systems. 312 species now called themselves members. 1,000 worlds flew the Alliance banner, and humanity stood at the center of it all. The Great Assembly Hall of the Alliance was even larger than the Council's ancient chamber, but the feeling inside was completely different. There were no tiers separating the powerful from the weak. There were no reserved seats for elder species. Every representative sat as an equal around a massive circular table that symbolized the unity they had built together. Ambassador Daniel Cooper stood at the speaker's position. He was older now, with gray in his hair and lines on his face that had not been there 5 years ago. But his eyes still burned with the same fire that had driven him to walk out of the council chamber all those years ago. 5 years ago, humanity made a choice, he said. His voice carried clearly through the hall, reaching every ear and translator in the massive space. "We chose to reject a universe where power belonged only to those who had always held it. We chose to believe that every species has the right to reach for the stars without asking permission. We chose hope over fear." He paused and looked around at the assembled representatives. There were beings with scales and beings with fur and beings with shells. There were species that breathed oxygen and species that breathed methane and species that did not breathe at all. All of them had come together because of what humanity had offered. The council called us primitive, they called us dangerous, they called us a threat to everything they had built. Daniel smiled slightly. They were right about one thing: we are a threat. We are a threat to tyranny. We are a threat to stagnation. We are a threat to the idea that the universe belongs to anyone but those willing to explore it together. The hall erupted in sounds of approval. Different species showed their agreement in different ways. Some clapped, some stomped, some made sounds that human ears could barely perceive, but the meaning was clear. They believed in what humanity had created. They believed in the Alliance. Far away on Earth, President Maria Santos watched the broadcast from her office. The same office where she had made the decision to reject the Council's peace offer. The same office where she had set humanity on a path that had changed everything. Beside her stood Admiral Mills and Secretary Cross and Dr. Lane. They had all grown older in 5 years. They had all sacrificed more than they ever expected, but they had also accomplished more than they had ever dreamed possible. "We actually did it," said quietly. Her voice held a mix of wonder and exhaustion. "We changed the entire galaxy." "The question is what we do with that change," Maria replied. "Power like this can corrupt. It can become exactly what we fought against. Every empire in history has started with good intentions and ended in tyranny." Slowly, she had spent her entire life studying the Council's history. She knew better than anyone how easily power could poison those who held it. The humans who come after us will face that temptation. The temptation to control instead of cooperate. The temptation to dominate instead of lead. We have given them the power to rule the galaxy if they choose to take it. "Then we make sure they never make that choice," said firmly. "We build systems that distribute power. We create checks and balances. We make it impossible for any single species to control everything, not even us." Maria turned from the window and faced her friends. "It is not enough to build systems. Systems can be corrupted, laws can be changed. The only real protection against tyranny is memory. We need to make sure that every human child grows up knowing our history, not just the victories but the pain, the 73 years of humiliation, the species the Council destroyed, the billions who suffered under their rule. She walked to her desk and picked up a small crystal chip. It contained the same files that had discovered decades ago, the records of every species the Council had eliminated, every world they had sterilized, every dream they had crushed. We became what we are because we remembered what it felt like to be powerless. That memory is what keeps us from becoming monsters. We must pass it down to every generation that follows. We must never let them forget. In the depths of space far from Earth and far from the Alliance, an ancient vessel drifted through the darkness. It was a ship older than human civilization, and aboard that ship, the last surviving elder of the Inner Circle recorded a message for future generations. Elder Eth was ancient even by standards. He had lived for nearly 2,000 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched the Council grow from a small alliance into the dominant power in the galaxy, and now he was watching it crumble. "We believed ourselves the masters of creation," Eth said into the recording device. His voice was tired and heavy with regret. "We believed that power once held could never be challenged. We believed that the universe would always bend to our will. We were wrong." He paused, and his many eyes turned toward a viewport showing the distant stars. Somewhere out there humanity was building something new, something that would outlast everything the Council had created. The humans taught us a lesson that we should have learned long ago. Progress cannot be stopped. It can only be delayed. Tyranny, no matter how ancient, eventually falls. The universe belongs not to those who try to control it, but to those who are brave enough to explore it freely. He was silent for a long moment, then he continued in a softer voice. "I do not know what the future holds. Perhaps the humans will prove better stewards than we were. Perhaps they will fall to the same corruption that consumed us, but I know this: they gave the galaxy something we never could. They gave it hope, real hope, the hope that tomorrow can be different from yesterday, the hope that the chains of the past do not have to bind the future." His recording ended, but his words spread across the stars. They were shared and translated into 1,000 languages. They became a testament to what humanity had accomplished, not through conquest, not through destruction, but through the simple act of believing that things could be better. And they were better. Across the galaxy, species that had been held back for millennia were suddenly free to grow. Technology that had been suppressed was now shared openly. Ideas that had been forbidden were now celebrated. The universe was changing, and it was changing because humanity had dared to light a fire that the Council could not extinguish. On the bridge of the defiant Commander Grey looked out at the stars. He was older now, and he carried scars from battles fought and won, but he also carried something else. Pride in what humanity had become, pride in what they had built together with species that had once been strangers. "Sir," his communications officer said, "we are receiving a transmission from Earth. The Alliance Assembly has voted to expand the free technology. Full fold space drive specifications will be shared with all member species within the year." "Good. The we spread the knowledge, the harder it will be for anyone to control it, including us." "Including us, sir?" Turned to face his young officer. "The greatest danger we face is not the Council or any external enemy. It is ourselves. The moment we start thinking that humanity deserves special treatment is the moment we become what we fought against. We share everything. We control nothing. That is the only way this works." The young officer slowly, understanding dawned in his eyes. "We are not building an empire, we are building a family." Exactly. Turned back to the stars. A family of hundreds of species spread across thousands of worlds, united not by force but by choice. That is humanity's legacy. That is what we gave the universe. And far away on Earth, in a small school in a small city, a teacher was telling her students about the day everything changed. She spoke of courage and sacrifice and hope. She spoke of the leaders who had risked everything for freedom, and she told them the most important lesson of all. The universe had once quaked in fear of humanity, but it was not fear of human weapons or human ships. It was fear of human ideas, ideas that could not be suppressed, ideas that could not be controlled, ideas that spread like fire across the stars. And in that fire, the galaxy was reborn.